We will start today a series of short episodes, each dealing with 5 questions, almost on the lines of FAQ psychoanalysis. We will deal with these questions in short. We won't go into elaborate theoretical elaborations. 5 questions, short answers. Every session we take different 5 questions. Let us see for today what we have. The first question: is the split all bad and the depressive position all good? It's a very good question. Most therapists in the psychoanalytic community believe that the split is all bad and the depressive position is all good. The split is a problem position and the goal is the depressive position. The goal of therapy therefore becomes how to close the split and how to institute a depressive position. This is the belief not only of general psychoanalytically oriented practitioners, but also of those who have studied deeply the Kleinian school. And this is because Klein could not appreciate the good part of the split position. That was Klein's limitation, that she could not appreciate beyond a point. In fact, why beyond a point? She could hardly appreciate the good of the split position and the not good of the depressive position. And therefore, starting from her and across most psychoanalytic practitioners and scholars, this problem continues that there is a split regarding the split. The split is that they consider the split position to be the all bad position and the depressive position to be the all good position. And therefore the goal becomes to move from the problem split position towards the depressive position, which is the resolution. This is not entirely true. In fact, if we examine the split more closely, we realize that there are many good parts in the split position and there are not good parts in the depressive position. Just as there are problematic areas of the split position and the good parts of the depressive position. On the average, on the whole, you can say the depressive position may appear to be more adaptive to reality, to our rather average ordinary social reality compared to the split position. In extreme pathological conditions, of course, the split is a problem and the depressive position is the goal, no doubt about it. But that does not take away the fact that both positions have good and not good parts to them. And therefore, we are not dealing in area of an absolute. We are dealing in an area of ambivalence. The split is an ambivalent position, not ambivalent in the sense of, let me not use this word. Let me say the split has good and bad parts to it, and the depressive position also had good and not good parts to it. On the whole, the depressive position may have more good parts than the difficult parts compared to the split, and therefore may appear to be a better position. But there are many exceptions to this situation, and we have to go into the nuances to really appreciate the whole question. So, point one, if we are dealing with the split open in a pathological condition, there is no doubt that the split needs to be closed and the depressive position is the goal position. Number two, the split has many difficult parts to it and the depressive position has many good parts to it. Number three, the split position is an extreme position or an intense position, whereas the depressive position is a more moderate, balanced, measured, and a practically adaptive position. No doubt about the first three parts. But now the qualifications start. The good parts of the split have to be enumerated and understood, and the bad parts of the depressive position also need to be enumerated and understood, so that we have a holistic understanding of both the positions and we make a more informed, balanced, and accurate choice in any given context. So let us first look at the good parts of the split position. First, we experience ecstasy in the split position when we are one with the all good object, and that is something we always want, and we go euphoric the moment we have it, and this is a constant striving, and there's nothing wrong in that striving. The feeling is so pleasant that it would be unnatural for people to strive for it. And one therefore good part of the split position is the affective feeling of that position, which is so pleasant. Second, the split position also is the position of very intense creativity. This is also something new. Klein used to believe that after the attack on the breast, when the child realizes that it is the good breast it attacked by mistake, there is guilt and there is reparation. And this reparation is the first instance of psychic creativity. This is not true. The first instance of psychic creativity, the starting of aesthetics, actually is in the split position. Because in the split position, when the all good and the all bad are being created, they don't fall from heaven. They have to be created using more elemental entities and manufactured in the mind. And that is, really speaking, the first act of creativity. The endowing on the object of qualities good and bad, and using imagination without attenuation to exaggerate it as a work of an art, maybe work of a pathological art, but still work of an art. And it's not necessarily a work of pathological art, it can be a work of art itself when we are talking of the good object. It can become the pathological element of instance of pathological art when we talk of the bad object, or omnipotent bad object. But this endowing of omnipotence, this endowing of qualities going to the level of omnipotence is itself is an act of creativity. So the split is also the first location, the first station of creativity, and in adult life also far more creativity happens in the split position than in the depressive position. Without a split open, not necessarily fully open, it may be partially open, but without a split open, it's difficult to do intensely creative work. Omnipotence. Omnipotence is also looked upon wrongly as something only pathological, but it has both sides to it. There is a good side of omnipotence. It is something that provides us with security. It something provides us with ecstasy, something that provides us with inspiration, something that provides us with confidence and self-assurance. So omnipotence also is experienced, and it becomes an active entity in the mind, and then it gets projected outside And some of the projections are benign and some of the projections are pathological. But omnipotence, the good part of it also is experienced in the split, just as the bad part of it is also experienced in the split. So it is both good and bad manifestation of omnipotence. Art happens when the split is open, usually partially. It's very difficult to do art in the depressive position. The whole idea of the sacred, the feeling of the sacred also happens in the split position. In the depressive position, one can only take a rationalist view of the world. It is in the split position that we are really able to go to the extremes and experience or believe in the sacred. The idea of reverie, the feeling of reverie also happens in the split position. When the bad part of the split is deactivated, the good part is activated, and this brings in the element of activation and deactivation, very important element in human psyche, not focused on enough. Some other day we will talk about it. The significance of the centrality, not only significance, but centrality of activation and deactivation. So when the bad object part is deactivated and the good part is activated, and one slowly goes into it, there is a feeling of reverie and bliss, which also happens only when the split is partially open. The deactivation of most of the psychic activity and activation of bliss also happens in the split position. And this is a position into which spiritual seekers want to go. It is not a depressive position which says this is the good part of the world, not good part of the world, and then take a holistic view and come to a moderate point of happiness just above the line of sorrow. This is not that state. The state of the goal of spiritual seekers is bliss, not the state of depressive position. Great revolutions in human history also have happened only because the split was open and somebody was inspired to an extraordinary goal. All ideologies are created and point out to a goal which involves a split position. The goal of human life, when we think, is never to be ordinary. Carl Jung used to say, to be normal is the ideal aim of the unsuccessful. So no human being can be contented to have ordinariness, the averageness is the goal of human life. No matter how high psychoanalysis may try to lift reality acceptance, no human being can be satisfied with reality acceptance being the goal. No matter how much mourning you do, it is something psychoanalysis is trying to put on a throne which the king cannot hold on. The goal of human life will always be something more than the ordinary, and this comes about only in the split position. So we see the productivity of the split position, the good parts, good processes, good feelings, good states we experience, good productivity that comes out of the split position. So this we have seen is the good of the split position. Now let us see the not good of the depressive position. The first difficulty in the depressive position is the depression, because we are hardwired by nature to seek omnipotence and seek ecstasy of the split position. And we can never give it up completely. We will always seek it in different forms. And if we give it up, genuinely speaking, we enter into a very difficult depression. And therefore, most people never close the split completely. They partially close it, feel the partial depression, and continue with partially open split, where they can go back for rejuvenation, refreshment, and the feeling of reverie and bliss, and the feeling of ecstasy and omnipotence. And if you really go into the full depressive position, you get into a very profound depression. There is ordinariness, a banality in the depressive position. There is a dryness, almost a form of a dysthymia. in the depressive position. And from there you can operate only with ordinary reason, which has its own severe limitations. Those who are into philosophy and study isms know how worn out, old, and done with idea is rationalism. Those outside of philosophy may worship rationalism, not knowing fully the history of isms in philosophy. But those who know it, they know how worn out and how limited the idea of rationalism is. And in the depressive position, all you can do is to take a rationalism foundation based position of ordinary reason, and that itself has severe limitations. So these are some of the limitations of the depressive position. There will be many more that I have not listed out here. So this answers the question, is the split all bad? No. Is the depressive position all good? No. There is good and bad in the split, good and bad in the depressive position. In pathological situation, of course, the goal is to move from split to the depressive position, but the pathological situation is only one situation. There are 10 different situations, and in many of them, the split is better than the depressive positions, and in some of them, depressive position is better than the split position. So it's a very contextual thing, what is better when, but this extreme position, this split regarding the split, that split is all bad and depressive position is all good, is a completely wrong idea. Second question, has Kohut invaded ISTDP? It's a good question because Kohut and ISTDP almost are two ends of a continuum. ISTDP goes into challenge, confrontation, head-on collision. Kohut goes into empathy, holding, support, allowing the person to experience grandiosity, self-object experiences. So this is as soft as it can be. This is as hard as it can be. Now, has the soft invaded the hard? It's a good question. I would answer it like this. Usually in any school of psychoanalysis itself is split into the cohesion part, self-psychology, and other classical parts of classical schools of psychoanalysis. And of course, Jung is seen as somebody completely out of the picture. So I'm not factoring in Jung, but Jung put outside the boundary. Within the boundary of psychoanalysis, classically as it's understood today, uh, Kohut is seen on the margin. So this Kohut on one side, self-psychology approach, and all other approaches on the other side. On the other side, Kohut never invades any school. In fact, Kohut is invited as a necessary evil by any school when that school has no choice but to invite Kohut. So every school in its evolution in psychoanalysis sometimes realizes that interpretation, challenge, showing the mirror, these activities can be disintegrating to the person. The person may be too fragile. The person may be already too much in trouble to really take your challenge. And therefore, every school at some point realizes there is need for holding and there is need for a basket full of techniques which are not geared on the classical route of psychoanalysis but have a different flavor, a cohesion flavor. So Kohut is invited as a necessary evil by schools in psychoanalysis when they have no choice but to invite Kohut conceptually and then in terms of technique. In ISTDP, we can start this discussion by going into the idea of powerlessness and helplessness. Has Kohut got into ISTDP? Yes. How has Kohut got into ISTDP? Kohut has got into ISTDP from 2 points. One is the fragile patients. So they have realized they need support. They don't need challenge, confrontation, or head-on collision. They need support. And there is a deficit here in terms of the capacity to bear affect. And unless the deficit is taken care of, the anxiety rises so high that the person does not remain in the striated area, and therefore the ISTDP process cannot work. So in fragile patients where the deficit of capacity to bear affect is seen, support is needed. So that is where Kohut has come into ISTDP, not acknowledged adequately by those in ISTDP, that they are bringing in Kohut without acknowledging it so. Second area where Kohutian approach has come in is in the area of depression. Initially, it was just challenging the person to express feelings towards the therapist. Now, the challenge is replaced by support because they have realized the person in depression needs support, not challenge. So, this is again an area where Kohut has come in. My personal belief is personality disorders also is an area where again Kohut will come in, because in personality disorders we find very strong mirroring failures. Just a question of time before they come up in therapy. Regardless of which personality disorder you are dealing with, there is a mirroring failure in most cases, if not all. And this mirroring failure is mirroring of the quotient type, the quotient mirroring failure. And that involves 5 A's. I have said this before, I'll repeat it. Acknowledgement, attention, affection, acknowledgement, attention, acceptance, affection, and duration. The 5 A's of mirroring. They always come up in personality disorders, and very floridly when we are dealing with bipolar personality disorder or borderline personality disorder or dependent personality disorder. In fact, they come up in all the personality disorders, but in these three very floridly, very soon. There is also an important element here that I have seen most people in ISTDP don't understand: the difference between powerlessness and helplessness. Helplessness is a stance which one takes in therapy mostly as a defense. In some cases it may be real, but mostly as a defense. So this also needs a qualification that helplessness not always is a defense. At times it is real, but in majority of cases, 75%, it is a defense. But powerlessness is a completely different element, and there is a confusion between the two. When somebody is not able to feel the affect, not able to get in touch with the affect, it is not always helplessness. At times it is powerlessness. The person is trying his best. He is not taking a helpless position of doing nothing, that I can't do nothing, nobody can do anything for me. Not that position. He is trying his best very hard, but he is just not able to overpower the resistance. This is very different. Powerlessness is very different from helplessness. And that is where those who are into the state of powerlessness, they require a cohesion support, like in case of depression, and not an interpretation of helplessness. So here again, Kohut has to come in, although he has not come in. But on the whole, Kohut is already into ISTDP, without ISTDP being honest enough to acknowledge it. And I think as we go along, we will see even more of cohort in ISTDP and in any school that deals with personality disorders. Third question, is fantasy image of all good mother and all good father a powerful determinant in our lives? Yes, it is a very powerful determinant in our life, a very active psychic element in our life across our lives. In 100 ways we don't even realize. Take a few examples. Our search for a leader always has, let me not say always, but mostly has projection of an omnipotent good father onto the leader. And that is true in political area, in the area of religion, spirituality. At the workplace, we have this projection on the mentor or our boss. And if it is all bad father, it's very difficult to work there. The terror is so much of both the attack of the pre-Oedipal bad father and the attack of the castrating Oedipal father. The search for the good father and the good mother is a lifelong process. It never ends. And whenever we get people who resemble it, we go manic in ecstasy. Art is an area where we find these projections in a pervasive way. We find all good father and all good mother in dreams in various ways. We have intense fear of authority figures when the projection of all bad father or the all bad mother is done. When we get terribly interested in celebrities, it is mostly because of projection of omnipotence and the projection of all good object onto the celebrity. There is also an element of identification. We live out through them, but there is also the projection. Usually it is the projection followed by identification. And without this surreal elements in our life, all good father, all good mother, or an all good idea of an ideology, or an all good celebrity, or an all good goal to which someday we will reach, without all of this, every day is extremely dull and boring. So the all good and the all bad are extremely important elements in our life, across our lives. And one specific manifestation of them is the element of all good father and all good mother. Similarly, a all bad father and a all bad mother. And there is a, with respect to all good father and mother, there is an element of feeling of ecstasy, and there is an element of dazzle of the splendor. There is a visual dazzle, either mostly in the inner sense of the mind. There is a splendor and there is a dazzle of the splendor, and feeling wise there is an ecstasy. And in case of all bad, there is a terror and there is avoidance, and there is a feeling of always being defeated, never being able to win or emerge victorious over the omnipotent object. Is psychedelic research likely to open up new frontiers? Yes, it will open up new frontiers. And there are, somebody said, I think it was Terence McKenna, who said psychedelics can be to psychology what telescope was to astronomy. It can allow us experience and vision, a visit to those states of mind which are not available in the normal state. So it can extend our vision deep into the psychological space. Psychedelic research has gone through a history of very intense research and findings, and then a ban on it. And again, it is now coming back. In the West and also in India, psychedelics have traditionally been used to explore different states of mind and for self-analysis, self-knowing and self-transformation. It can degrade into addiction, that's a separate issue altogether. But use of psychedelics for self-knowing and self-transformation is a very ancient process. In India, there are many traditional herbs which are used as psychedelic substances. In the Amazon forest, we can see shamans using the similar kind of thing. Different psychedelic compounds. Ayahuasca is one of the very popular ones. Some have used holotropic breathing. I think Stanislav Graf has invented and used holotropic breathing to bring about similar effects without the use of psychedelic substances. And he is also able to explore very different parts of the mind, not available to ordinary waking state, by using the holotropic breathing. Another aspect in the context is sobrasa. In India, there is a mention of this in ancient Vedic literature that sobrasa allows you very intense self-knowing and self-transformation. Some scholars have spent a lifetime trying to find out what it is and whether it is something which is a psychedelic substance to be ingested or something metaphorical and poetic. Most have concluded it is not something metaphorical and poetic. Sobrasa actually was a substance used in the Vedic times to explore the states of mind, very deep states of mind. And in recent times, Sri M, who is still alive, he writes in his autobiography that when intense and quick transformation of his own psychological system was to be done, he was put through a process, and in that process one of the elements was taking in a green liquid which can be sobrasa. He is the best person to elaborate on this, but we do have some material to think over and understand in the context of the question. And psychedelics do give you a voyage of the mind, which can be re-experiencing normal states of mind in a different way, experiencing something we have never experienced in the sense of slowing down of time or twisting of space, and having parapsychological, mystical or spiritual experiences. Many of the psychedelic users report their meetings with archetypal figures, the type of archetypal figures that you get described. So psychedelics, surely the psychedelic research is coming back. Psychedelics for healing also is coming back. Next 10 years, we should see a new wave of psychedelic research and psychedelic substances for healing, for knowing oneself and self-transformation. Last question for the day. How do we understand consciousness and sharpness? By consciousness, I think we mean here the feeling of feeling very conscious when somebody is looking at us, and not consciousness in the sense it is used in philosophy or spirituality. So there are very elements of this state, like when we are going on the road and we have frightened people looking at us, we become extremely conscious. There is a kind of contraction inside to hold tight, almost as though we are averting an attack. And similar kind of stage fear also we see if we have to go in the stage, on the stage, or we see where in a social occasion we have the gaze of people over us. So there is something to do with the gaze of many. The gaze of many activates this heightened feeling of self-consciousness and shyness. One of the elements of this state is high energy. Second element is excitement. Third is anxiety, often an orgasmic feeling. And combined with a fear of attack, a fear of being mocked at, a fear of being uh, criticized, a fear of being mocked at, and a fear which something which can induce shame in us. And therefore there is a recoil into oneself. There is a movement to recoil and withdraw into oneself. And there is a movement to run away from that place and not to be seen by them. And almost vanish into shyness. That one just runs away from it, closes the door and withdraws into oneself, keeps contracting till one vanishes into shyness, or vanishes out of shyness, or vanishes owing to shyness. So this is how, these are the elements that are involved in this area of feeling very conscious and very shy. Essentially, it is a combination of I am not good enough and ecstatic response to admiration and an element of transgression. All the three combine to create this feeling of feeling extremely conscious and shy. We will, by practice, you can overcome it. There's nothing deep about it. I mean, there is something deep about it, but there's nothing insurmountable about it. You can overcome it by practice. Even if you don't go into analysis, by practice, you can overcome. Something that behaviorally you can work on yourself very effectively. But if you are interested in understanding, we can go deeper into this some other time. This whole element of shame, fame, shyness, and the shyness involving I am not good enough, I am good enough, something of transgress, some transgressive element, some orgasmic element, some excitement element, some shame, and vanishing out of shyness. So we'll take up in detail someday, but for the moment, these are the elements involved in these two areas that you have pointed out. Thank you so much. We have completed the first episode of 5 questions. We'll take up some more questions next time, 5 more questions next time. Let me know if you have some questions.